Los Angeles in 1928 was a city caught between promise and danger. The skyline was beginning to stretch higher, new movie palaces drew dreamers from across the country, and oil money poured in from the fields on its outskirts. But behind the glamour was a city under strain. Crime syndicates flourished, political scandals festered, and the Los Angeles Police Department, already distrusted by many, faced growing accusations of corruption and incompetence. It was in this climate that the life of Christine Collins, a telephone operator living in the working-class district of Lincoln Heights, was thrown into turmoil. Christine had struggled as a single mother, raising her 9-year-old son Walter on her own after her husband was imprisoned. Despite hardships, she built a stable life for her boy. Walter was a bright, polite child with a shy smile and a deep attachment to his mother. Their small home was modest, but it was filled with warmth, a quiet refuge in a city that seemed to grow louder every day. On Saturday, March 10, 1928, that fragile sense of security fractured. Christine, working long hours to keep her household afloat, gave Walter a dime, enough to see a movie at the neighborhood theater. She expected him home in a few hours, as he had been many times before. But when dusk settled across Lincoln Heights and Walter had not returned, Christine's calm shifted to unease. She went out to the street, calling his name, checking with neighbors, scanning the familiar routes he usually took. By nightfall, unease had turned to terror. Walter Collins had vanished. Christine contacted the police immediately, but the response reflected a system ill-prepared for urgency. Officers suggested that Walter might have simply run away, perhaps upset over something trivial. It was a dismissive assumption Christine refused to accept. Walter was not a rebellious child. He was dependable, careful, and devoted to her. The more police downplayed her fears, the more determined she became to press them into action. Over the next few days, Christine organized her own search, canvassing the neighborhood, asking shopkeepers if they had seen Walter, retracing every step she could imagine he might have taken. Witnesses offered fragments of possibility. A few said they saw Walter walking down Pasadena Avenue. Others recalled a boy matching his description near a corner store. But none of the accounts led anywhere definitive. The city, meanwhile, watched with growing unease. Newspapers picked up the story, playing on the public's fascination with missing children and the vulnerability of single mothers trying to survive in a ruthless urban landscape. Photographs of Walter, small, serious, dressed neatly, appeared in print, his innocent image stark against headlines demanding answers. Christine clung to hope, even as days stretched into weeks. Each passing night was a test of endurance, the waiting compounded by a lack of solid leads. She visited police stations repeatedly, pushing for progress, only to be met with platitudes or suggestions that Walter might eventually come home on his own. The case lingered without breakthroughs, and whispers began to circulate. The 1920s were rife with stories of child abductions, runaways, and human trafficking rings preying on the vulnerable. Parents across Los Angeles locked doors tighter, holding their children closer. For Christine, each rumor carried unbearable weight. She did not want speculation. She wanted her son. By early April, the LAPD was under increasing scrutiny. The Collins case had become a public embarrassment, a symbol of the department's inability to solve high-profile crimes. Local papers were merciless, running editorials on police incompetence and demanding accountability. For Christine, this exposure brought both comfort and despair. Her son's face was everywhere, but there was still no sign of him. Months dragged on, and the silence deepened. Christine maintained her routine, working, searching, and praying for a breakthrough. Her love for Walter never wavered, and she held onto the belief that he was alive somewhere, waiting to be found. But with no ransom demand, no credible sightings, and no reliable witnesses, the investigation seemed to collapse into nothing. It was in this vacuum of despair, just as hope seemed to dwindle, that the police would return months later with shocking news. Walter had been found alive in Illinois. A train was arranged to bring him home. Reporters clamored for details. Headlines proclaimed a miracle. But as Christine would soon discover, the nightmare was only beginning. You're watching Trace of Evil, where we reveal true crimes, unsolved disappearances, and mysteries surrounding crime. Like and subscribe to watch more episodes from our channel. Let's get back into the story of Walter Collins. By late summer of 1928, the story of Walter Collins had drifted into the background of Los Angeles headlines. Months had passed since his disappearance, and while Christine Collins continued to plead for answers, the case had grown cold. Then, in August, the LAPD announced what seemed like an extraordinary breakthrough. Walter had been located alive in DeKalb, Illinois. The announcement electrified the city. Newspapers hailed the police as heroes who had finally redeemed themselves after months of criticism. For Christine, the news was a surge of relief. After endless nights of grief, she clung to the hope that her child was finally coming home. She borrowed the optimism in the headlines, allowing herself to believe that the nightmare was about to end. When the train carrying the boy arrived in Los Angeles, anticipation was immense. Journalists, photographers, and curious citizens gathered to witness what was being framed as a miraculous reunion. Christine, however, felt a strange apprehension. She had studied her son's face so often in photographs that she could trace every line in her memory. When the boy stepped off the train, she froze. Something wasn't right. The child resembled Walter, but not enough. His teeth, his mannerisms, even his height seemed off. Christine hesitated, but under the gaze of reporters and officers, she embraced the boy. Cameras clicked, capturing what was supposed to be a triumphant moment. Yet beneath her smile, uncertainty gnawed at her. Within days, her unease turned into certainty. The boy in her home was not Walter. He did not share her son's intimate quirks, his quiet way of speaking, or his specific preferences. She compared old dental records and discovered discrepancies. His teeth did not match Walter's. Confronted with mounting evidence, she informed the police that they had made a terrible mistake. But instead of listening, the LAPD doubled down. For a department eager to repair its damaged image, acknowledging a blunder of this magnitude was unthinkable. Police Captain J.J. Jones, a man known for his arrogance and harsh demeanor, insisted that Christine was mistaken. He argued that trauma and grief had clouded her judgment. According to him, Walter had changed during his ordeal. He had lost weight, grown slightly taller, and adapted differently. To Jones, the case was closed, and Christine was being uncooperative. Christine refused to accept this narrative. She demanded the police admit their error and resume the search for her real son. But the more she resisted, the more hostile the department became. Captain Jones, frustrated by her persistence, accused her of trying to embarrass the police. In a shocking abuse of power, he ordered Christine committed to a psychiatric ward at Los Angeles County General Hospital under a Code 12, a designation used to silence individuals deemed troublesome or inconvenient. Behind locked doors, Christine endured humiliation and despair. Doctors subjected her to evaluations, pressing her to admit that the boy was Walter. When she refused, her sanity itself was questioned. The very institution meant to protect her had turned her into a prisoner of her own truth. Meanwhile, the impostor basked in the attention. He played the role of Walter convincingly enough for those unwilling to look too closely. For weeks, newspapers celebrated the boy's supposed survival. Yet cracks soon appeared. Under questioning, he admitted he was not Walter Collins at all, but a 12-year-old runaway named Arthur Hutchins Jr. from Iowa. He confessed that he had posed as Walter because he wanted a free trip to Hollywood, dreaming of meeting his favorite movie stars. The revelation was explosive. The LAPD's triumphant reunion collapsed into scandal. Captain Jones had not only mishandled the case, but had also locked an innocent mother in a psychiatric ward to preserve his department's reputation. Christine was released after 10 days, vindicated but scarred by the ordeal. Public outrage spread rapidly. Christine filed a lawsuit against Jones and the LAPD, demanding accountability for their actions. While she eventually won her case, receiving a judgment of $10,800, Jones never paid the fine, shielded by the very system that had enabled his abuse of power. The verdict, though symbolic, offered little comfort compared to the ongoing agony of not knowing Walter's fate. For Christine, the impostor episode was not only a betrayal but a devastating distraction. Precious time had been wasted chasing a lie while the trail to her real son grew colder. She returned to her solitary search, her determination hardened by the humiliation she had endured. The city of Los Angeles, too, was shaken. The case exposed the rot within the police department, confirming suspicions of corruption, incompetence, and cruelty. Yet for all the fury, no one could erase the fact that a 9-year-old boy was still missing. And as the false Walter faded from headlines, a darker truth began to emerge, one that would connect Walter Collins' disappearance to one of the most notorious criminal cases in California history. After the impostor scandal collapsed, Christine Collins returned to her lonely, desperate search for answers. But by the end of 1928, a new case broke in Southern California that would forever alter the course of Walter's story. In Riverside County, east of Los Angeles, police had begun investigating a rural farm in Wineville, an isolated property owned by a Canadian immigrant named Gordon Stewart Northcott. Neighbors had reported odd behavior, and suspicions mounted after a teenage boy named Sanford Clark escaped from the ranch and told authorities a story almost too horrific to believe. Sanford, only 15, claimed that he had been held captive at the farm for nearly 2 years, forced into servitude by Northcott and abused both physically and psychologically. What he revealed went far beyond cruelty. According to Sanford, Northcott had lured young boys to the ranch, often with the promise of work or safety, only to imprison, assault, and kill them. Sanford described the farm as a prison of nightmares where children vanished without a trace. When authorities raided the property, they were stunned. The small chicken ranch, with its dilapidated coops and ramshackle structures, appeared outwardly ordinary. But digging into the soil around the farm revealed evidence of unimaginable crimes. Investigators found bones, personal belongings, and traces of human remains. It was clear that the site had been used as a killing ground. The case quickly became one of the most shocking criminal investigations in California history. Northcott was arrested, and Sanford provided detailed testimony about the horrors he had witnessed. Among the victims Sanford recalled was a boy who resembled Walter Collins. He described how Northcott had targeted children from Los Angeles, often preying on the vulnerable, the poor, or the unguarded. Christine was drawn into the nightmare once again. When she heard that investigators believed her son might be among Northcott's victims, she clung to every word of Sanford's testimony. Yet the possibility was both devastating and uncertain. There was no conclusive proof, no body, no item definitively tied to Walter. Still, the descriptions fit too closely to ignore. The trial that followed exposed the depth of Northcott's depravity. Witnesses recounted his cruelty, and Sanford described being forced to participate under threats of violence. The evidence suggested that multiple boys had been killed at the ranch, their identities lost in the fragments of bones and burned remains. For Christine, the trial was a tormenting spectacle. She attended proceedings, desperate for answers. At times, prosecutors asserted that Walter was among the victims. At others, the defense cast doubt, suggesting the evidence was too fragmented to confirm identities. The courtroom became a place of shifting ground. Hope one moment, despair the next. Northcott himself was erratic and manipulative. He alternated between confessions and denials, sometimes admitting to killings, other times retracting his statements. At one point, he claimed to know the fate of Walter Collins, only to reverse himself again. His behavior suggested a man intoxicated by control, prolonging the suffering of families by dangling their need for answers before them. Ultimately, Northcott was convicted of multiple murders. He was sentenced to death and executed by hanging at San Quentin in 1930. Yet, even at the gallows, he refused to give clarity. Reporters later recounted how, when asked directly about Walter Collins, Northcott offered ambiguous statements, neither confirming nor denying his role in the boy's disappearance. Christine, who had fought tirelessly to know the truth, was left with only silence. The Wineville murders reverberated across California. The farm was forever marked by infamy, and the town itself changed its name from Wineville to Mira Loma in an effort to distance the community from its gruesome association. The case stood as one of the darkest chapters in the region's history. But for Christine, the end of Northcott's life was no resolution. The legal conclusion that Walter was most likely among the victims was never enough. Without his body, without certainty, she continued to hope against all reason that her son might still be alive somewhere. For her, closure never came. The Collins case became a symbol of both personal tragedy and institutional failure. A mother had been humiliated and silenced when she dared to challenge the police. Her son's fate had been tangled with one of the most horrifying crime sprees of the era. And in the end, even with a notorious killer executed, the question of Walter's fate remained painfully unresolved. The disappearance of Walter Collins was not just a private tragedy. It became a mirror reflecting the deep flaws in early 20th century policing, social trust, and media spectacle. When the story faded from headlines, the wounds it left behind never fully closed, shaping both the Collins family's future and the public's perception of law enforcement. Christine Collins, though resilient, carried the weight of unanswered questions until her final days. Her life became defined not only by the loss of her son, but by her unwavering defiance against authority figures who attempted to silence her. In challenging the Los Angeles Police Department, she embodied a rare voice of ordinary citizens confronting the machinery of power. She sued the LAPD and won, exposing systemic failures. Yet, despite the legal victory, she never received the compensation owed, as the department continued to evade accountability. For Christine, it wasn't about the money. It was about truth, about proving that her son's life mattered. The impostor boy saga left scars beyond the Collins household. It demonstrated how far a police department was willing to go to protect its reputation, even if it meant gaslighting a grieving mother and coercing a traumatized child into assuming an identity not his own. Newspapers of the time seized on the sensational elements, portraying the ordeal with lurid fascination. For days, headlines spun tales of mistaken identity, cover-ups, and scandal. But when the press moved on, Christine was left in silence, still without her son. Meanwhile, the shadow of Gordon Stewart Northcott loomed. His execution in 1930 for the Wineville Chicken Coop murders brought a grim sense of finality to some families, but it never delivered the closure Christine longed for. Northcott refused to admit Walter's death, vacillating between cryptic hints and outright denials. His gamesmanship left investigators unsure whether Walter was truly among his victims. Without a body, without a confession, and without proof, the mystery remained. It was a torment designed to last forever, locking Christine into an endless cycle of hope and despair. The case also reshaped Los Angeles itself. The scandal forced reforms within the LAPD, though not as sweeping as the public demanded. It became one of many episodes that fed the city's reputation for corruption, incompetence, and political maneuvering. In time, the police department would attempt to rehabilitate its image, but the Collins affair remained a cautionary tale of what happens when image matters more than integrity. Culturally, Walter's story has endured far beyond its era. Decades later, it inspired films, books, and documentaries, most notably Clint Eastwood's 2008 film Changeling, which brought Christine Collins' ordeal back into global awareness. Audiences were stunned by the cruelty of the impostor incident, the tragic ambiguity of Walter's fate, and the raw injustice faced by a mother dismissed as hysterical for daring to question authority. For the families of missing children, Walter's disappearance became a haunting reminder that justice is not always guaranteed. In the years after, advocacy groups slowly emerged, demanding better protections for children and accountability in cases of abduction. The Collins tragedy did not directly create these organizations, but it helped carve the space for future reforms, showing the devastating human cost of inaction. Walter himself, though absent, became a symbol. In many ways, his story is less about a boy who vanished and more about what was taken from those left behind. Christine's peace, the public's trust, and the possibility of truth. He became a child frozen in time, forever 9 years old, forever missing, forever the subject of questions with no answers. The Wineville community, too, bore a mark. So notorious was the stigma attached to the murders that in 1930 the town officially changed its name to Mira Loma, as if a new label could erase its grim history. Yet no rebranding could wash away the reality of what had occurred there. the brutal exploitation of children and the possible silencing of Walter Collins within those chicken coops. The enduring mystery ensures that Walter's name is not forgotten. His case continues to draw the interest of historians, criminologists, and true crime investigators. Each time the story is retold, it reopens the central question. Was Walter truly one of Northcott's victims, or did he slip away into another, unknown fate? The silence that followed his disappearance leaves both possibilities alive, neither fully provable nor dismissible. Christine Collins passed away in 1964, never learning the truth. To the end, she maintained hope, clinging to the idea that Walter might one day walk through her door. Hope can be cruel, but it was also her survival. For nearly 4 decades, she lived with the ache of an unresolved ending. Today, more than 90 years later, the disappearance of Walter Collins still resonates. It is not only a story of a missing child, but a parable about power, corruption, and the resilience of a mother's love. It speaks to the dangerous ease with which institutions can fail the vulnerable, and how individuals, even in the face of overwhelming opposition, can demand to be heard. The tragedy of Walter Collins is, above all else, a reminder that behind every unsolved case lies a family whose life is forever fractured. His story endures not because of answers, but because of the void left in their absence.